This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on G20 Labour and Employment Ministers meeting. The participants are Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, Economic Analyst, and Lalima Aneja Dang, Anchor.
Today, the Honourable Prime Minister addressed via video message the G20 meeting on Labour and Employment Ministers meet at Indore, Madhya Pradesh. Indeed, employment is a very significant social parameter of a country's economy and progress. Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee with us, our financial expert. Shubhamoy, welcome to Akashvani Studio.
Thank you.
Please give us an overview of the key agenda of the meeting.
Yeah, Lalima, so let's first understand how the G20 operates. So as you know, the G20 brings together 19 countries which are the world's leading GDP. Along with them is the European Union. Now, these 20 sit together at a table every year. Why is it significant? Because in each of these meetings, the heads of the state, that is the president and the prime minister of the country, also participates. That gives it the significance which no other sort of meetings, like even the United Nations or anything, brings in. As a result of this meeting, and these meetings are basically supposed to be on economic issues. They are not political meetings. So in the G20 meetings, the heads of the states basically develop an agenda which will be common for them and common for these 19 countries plus the European Union, which means practically 80% of the world GDP for the next year. And also looking forward on a medium scale for several years ahead. The G20 therefore not only brings the heads of the state, but also by their directions, the ministers of different countries or the secretaries concerned, depending on the governance structure of those countries, get together. Now, so that means that there are specific issues which are handled by G20. So whether it's energy, whether it's labor, as we are discussing today, whether it's health, whether it's finance, whether it's environment, there are so many issues that the G20 brings on the table. And that means that these issues, what happens? Essentially, the ministers talk to each other, develop a common framework or a platform to strengthen their commonness, strengthen their identification on similar issues, and on issues where there is a disparity or where there is a division of opinion, the ministers are able to reconcile those opinions. So for the working of the global economic order, the G20 therefore plays the most important role of bringing the political structure, the political agencies of each country together to decide on issues and resolve them every year. And that is where, for instance, as we are talking about labor, as we shall be talking later on, will also find its salience.
Shubhamoy, the Prime Minister focused on technology being the core driver for employment, more so because this is the era of fourth industrial revolution. We have our very own e-Shram portal where 280 million people have registered in the last 1 year alone, which is a huge logistic exercise, isn't it? Can the world learn from our digital advancement?
Sure, it can. In fact, the digital advantage is a very significant thing to bring along. But first, let's just look at some of the critical issues that the Prime Minister was flagging regard to labor. Now, what he is saying is that the labor standards that we are talking about, the use of labor, has to have a pan-global presence. Now, why is it so? Because unlike capital, which flows very easily across borders, labor doesn't flow so easily across borders. There are huge challenges among the countries. Labor tends to be very rigid because countries put up barriers. And because of those barriers, the benefits of labor are not often utilized. In fact, I would say that they are actually utilized very rarely compared to the possibilities that labor offers. So therefore, labor issues to stay as a sort of a very major, obstacle in flow of trade and commerce between countries. In fact, if we look at it, what is called the WTO classification, then labor movement is what is called the mode 4. And this mode 4, the movement of labor, compared to the movement of capital, compared to the movement of investment and tourism, labor movement is a very, very difficult thing. And that is where the Prime Minister was sort of putting an emphasis on that moving labor, making it comfortable across countries, bringing in some common yardsticks, works a lot. Now, coming to the point of what you're talking about, the technology, in these days when labor doesn't work as like the 20th century's system, it moves in a very mobile fashion. where it identifies with capital and technology to develop products, the utilization of labor becomes very different from the way it used to be done in the 20th century. So you don't get large production processes. You don't get places where, there are huge factories where people are sitting down, where people are standing along with huge production processes. Instead, the processes are much more flexible. They happen either at home or they happen in a distributed place because of the global supply chain. And all of that has been made possible because of the change or the advancement of technology, which has made labor very flexible.
I was coming to that, Shubhama, when you talk of labor, in fact, we have a huge informal sector in our country, and we call them gig workers. On a very minute scale, we have a marriage season in our country, and then suddenly there is a harvesting season where all the workforce wants to go back to the villages, to their fields, to work in their fields. So you have a lot of labor which is moving within the country, within our country, from village and town, cities, and we have within the world from one country to another. In both the cases, we have to now ensure that this mobility, which has become more now, we have to ensure their security as well as you just said, that we get the best out of this mobile workforce. Is the G20 focusing on this aspect as well?
Certainly. COVID has definitely brought out the risks to the global production process when labor isn't really available. You talked of the experience of what we had in India, but globally too, movement of, for instance, shipping, which depends very strongly on labor, was affected. So lots of supply shocks that we had was because of the fact that the labor wasn't adequately available. There are, especially in Asia, labor moves very strongly across countries and provides the competitive edge. But when those competitive edge gets difficult to extract because of pandemics like labor, that makes it very difficult for countries to come up with methods that would make their production process very, very able and supple enough to handle the advantages that labor gives us.
Shobha, let's move on from labor to gender disparity. The Prime Minister often talks about not just development of women, but he talks about women-led development. Is the G20 meet now geared up to talk about and to take this forward, women-led development? We have walked the talk in our country. We know we have a finance minister who was earlier the defense minister as well. So we have walked the talk. Are we globally prepared to walk the talk on women-led development?
Certainly. There's a labor movement across countries needs that women's safety and gender issues are particularly taken care of. As you know, women are very vulnerable. Yeah. And if the law and order, if the global situations are not made smoother. So bringing along globally accepted standards of what labor should be getting along in terms of facilities, in terms of safety, in terms of security, in terms of off-work facilities, those become significant, and typically a forum like G20 is in a very good position to give guidance so that the huge army of labor, especially those from the global south, are able to take advantage of that possibilities that women labor, for instance, provides. As you know, technology-based firms, especially IT, I'm referring to the information technology sector, most of their working force is women. Women are particularly adept at handling electronics and electrical equipment. Also, in our neighboring Bangladesh, you would have seen that the garment revolution has happened because of women. Now, all of this means that taking care of women is not just because, it should be done, but it actually is a very economically useful item because they provide the competitive edge to companies. But that can only happen if there are certain standards, if there are certain methods in terms of what they can expect in a foreign country. Because obviously they, as immigrant workers, will be at risk and they would need those facilities, which means that the countries have to provide facilities and standards which they will only do if a forum like G20 comes across to help them out to create uniform systems.
And also to add to what you're saying, we are now talking about, of course, we have the maternity leave and many companies are now giving paternity leave as well, hoping that the husband now looks after the children once the child is born. Not just that, we're also talking about having creches for children at workplaces. These are some of the support systems which can be done to facilitate women working. On the whole, globally, the participation of women in workforce has come down, which is the cause of worry for many leaders. Do you think that these measures are also going to be looked into apart from pay parity and other things?
Certainly. The idea that women have to be part of the workforce and in increasing numbers is now beyond question. question is how to ensure that those countries where it's not possible or where women from those countries move out to other countries for work or even other regions, what are the standards that are brought in? What are the measures that are brought in? And as I say, that these are not something one is doing simply to make more women work, but simply that it makes economic sense. So a push from G20, strong wording from G20 helps to bring these issues up front. And that's very necessary, and that's what we should be looking at in the 21st century world.
Shubhamay, let's move from women to another important aspect of our population, and that's the youth. India is a young country with a huge youth population. The Prime Minister has often focused on skilling and reskilling and upskilling. He calls this a very important aspect of skill development, and the fact that we have a dedicated ministry for skill development speaks volumes about the seriousness with which the Honorable Prime Minister and the government has taken this issue of skill development. We have about 12.5 million youth who have been trained under the skill development mission. Now, do you think that the dream of India being the capital of skill, or skill capital, as they say, of the world is coming true? Do you see that happening?
Yeah, we do see that, and in fact, you can see there's a lot happening in terms of because India is actually a place which has got extremely good labor quality, and we naturally will be interested in allowing or encouraging more use of that skill, these workers being deployed usefully across the countries. And several countries have already shown interest in using India's army of nurses, India's army of teachers, because they don't have the capacity to produce those people in adequate numbers. So it makes sense that Indian people of those capacities are used, and it's a useful situation because countries can actually use their capacity for training to deploy their capital in India, and that makes suitable returns from them they can generate. And along with that, India can get the advantage its workers are skilled and trained, and that gives them the chance to develop beneficial systems across the globe. And later on, once this cohort of workers gets trained, the same training facilities can also be used in the global south for other countries which are not able to set up their own facilities and systems, and they can start training their workers to get similar or suitable facilities. So overall, as you can see, there's a lot of global benefit that flows from this entire setting up such a network and architecture which is pan-global, and that's definitely something to be looked forward to.
So the fact that, Shubhamay, we have a huge demographic dividend in our youth population, it's also our population can be an asset considering the fact that many countries are looking at India as a great market for their products. Not just that, when we talk about skilling our workers, we are actually capitalizing on our youth and getting demographic dividend, as they say. We have also focused now, because the skill, as I just talked about skilling and reskilling and upskilling as a core of skill development, the Prime Minister focused on 4 areas primarily. We usually talked about the IT industry. Apart from that, now we're talking about artificial intelligence, 1, second, robotics, 3rd, Internet of Things, and 4th, drones.
So all of these things will be very useful because all of them sort of, build on the capacity of the labor, because Indian labor, as you rightly pointed out, is extremely sophisticated, and their sophistication level is increasing, and it's commonly understood to be a very bright set of people, and underscored by the set of not just the IITs but also the ITIs and the subsequent other institutions down the line. Together they create a platform which helps a lot to develop engineering and other skills which can be extremely beneficial for the overall global productivity push ahead. As you know, global productivity needs also benefit from climate change issues, and even in those areas, or issues like offsetting to new technology, those will be coming very useful. So overall, these things are some things that we can look forward to.
So let's hope that the G20 meeting on Labour and Employment Ministers meet at Indore, Madhya Pradesh brings forth some out-of-the-box solutions, and as the Honourable Prime Minister said, that there need not be a one-size-fit-all. There might be a very specific solution for every country, but the fact that we're all sitting on one platform and discussing it brings hope for the whole world and kind of reinforces Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Well, thank you, Shubhamay Bhattacharjee, for talking to us and updating us with your views and reviews.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on G20 Labour and Employment Ministers meeting. The participants were Shubhamay Bhattacharjee, Economic Analyst, and Lalima Aneja Dang, Anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com